Gorgias took 5,000 infantry and 1,000 picked cavalry, and this detachment set out at night in order to launch a surprise attack on the camp of the Jews. Men from the citadel served as his guides. However, Judas learned of their plan, and he and his soldiers moved out to attack the royal forces at Emas, while some of the troops were still dispersed away from the camp. When Gorgias reached the camp of Judas by night, therefore, he found no one there, and he began to search for them in the mountains, saying, "These men are fleeing from us." At daybreak, Judas appeared in the plain with 3,000 men, although they lacked the armor and the swords they would have wished for. They saw the camp of the Gentiles with its strong fortifications, flanked with cavalry, and a fighting force expert in the art of warfare. Judas said to those who were with him, "Do not be afraid of their superior numbers or panic when they attack. Remember how our ancestors were saved at the Red Sea when Pharaoh was pursuing them with his forces. So now let us cry out to heaven, asking him to show us his favor, to remember his covenant with our ancestors, and to destroy this army confronting us today. Then all the Gentiles will know that there is one who redeems and saves Israel." When the foreigners looked up and saw them advancing against them, they came out of their camp to engage in battle. Then the men with Judas blew their trumpets, and the fighting began. The Gentiles were defeated and fled into the plain. All those who were in the rear fell by the sword, and the rest were pursued as far as Gazara and the plains of Judea to Azotus and Jamnia, with about 3,000 of them slain. When Judas and his army broke off their pursuit, he said to the people, "Do not be greedy for plunder, for we have yet another battle ahead of us. Gorgias and his army are very close to us in the mountain area. Stand firm now against our enemies and defeat them. After that, you can safely take as much booty as you please." Just as Judas was finishing this speech, a detachment appeared, looking down from the mountain. They could see that their army had been put to flight and that their camp was being burned. The smoke that could be clearly seen indicated what had occurred. When they perceived this, they were very much afraid, and when they also beheld the army of Judas in the plain, ready for battle, they all fled into the territory of the Philistines. Then Judas went back to plunder the camp, and they confiscated a great amount of gold and silver, violet and purple cloths, and magnificent treasures. As they returned, they sang hymns of thanksgiving and praise to glorify heaven, for he is good, for his mercy endures forever. Thus Israel experienced a great deliverance that day. Those foreigners who had managed to escape went to Lysias and reported to him everything that had occurred. When he heard the news, he was greatly disturbed and disappointed, because his plots against Israel had not turned out as he had intended, and in accordance with the command of the king. So the following year he mobilized 60,000 picked infantry and 5,000 cavalry to defeat them. They marched into Idumea and camped at Bethsur. Judas confronted them with 10,000 men, and when he realized how strong their army was, he offered this prayer: "Blessed are you, O Savior of Israel, who crushed the attack of the mighty warrior by the hand of your servant David, and delivered the camp of the Philistines into the hands of Jonathan, the son of Saul, and his armor-bearer. Deliver this army into the hands of your people Israel, and destroy the pride of the enemy in their troops and cavalry. Fill them with fear, weaken the boldness of their strength, and let them quake at their own destruction. Strike them down with the sword of those who love you, so that all who acknowledge your name will praise you with hymns." Then both sides entered into battle, and in the hand-to-hand combat 5,000 of the army of Lysias were slain. When Lysias saw his army being routed, and the boldness of the soldiers of Judas, who were prepared either to live or to die nobly, He withdrew to Antioch and began to recruit a force of mercenaries for a further invasion of Judea with an even larger army. Then Judas and his brothers said, "Behold, our enemies have been crushed. Let us go up to purify the sanctuary and rededicate it." And so the entire army assembled, and they went up to Mount Zion. There they found the sanctuary desolate, the altar desecrated, the gates burned to the ground, the courts overgrown with weeds as in a thicket or on some mountain, and the chambers of the priests in ruins. Then they tore their garments and uttered loud cries of mourning. They sprinkled their heads with ashes and fell prostrate with their faces to the ground. And when the signal was given with the trumpets, they cried out to heaven. Then Judas designated men to engage in combat with those in the citadel while he purified the sanctuary. He appointed blameless priests who were devoted to the law. These purified the sanctuary and carried off the stones of the abomination to an unclean place. They discussed what should be done about the altar of burnt offerings that had been desecrated, and they made the proper decision to demolish it so that it would not be a source of lasting shame to them, inasmuch as the Gentiles had defiled it. Therefore they tore down the altar and stored the stones in a suitable place on the temple hill, until a prophet should appear on the scene to determine what should be done with them. They took unhewn stones according to the law and built a new altar fashioned after the former one. They also repaired the sanctuary and the interior of the temple and purified the courts. They made new sacred vessels and brought the lampstand, the altar of incense, and the table into the temple. Then they burned incense on the altar, and they lit the lamp on the lampstands to illuminate the temple. Finally, they placed loaves of bread on the table and hung the curtains, thereby bringing to completion all of the work they had undertaken. Early in the morning on the 25th day of the 9th month, that is, the month of Kislev, in the year 148, they arose and offered sacrifice in accordance with the law on the new altar of burnt offerings that they had constructed. On the anniversary of the day on which the Gentiles had desecrated it, on that very day, it was dedicated with hymns, harps, flutes, and cymbals. All the people prostrated themselves in adoration and praised heaven, who had granted success to their endeavors. They celebrated the dedication of the altar for 8 days and joyfully offered burnt offerings and sacrifices of praise and thanksgiving. They decorated the front of the temple with gold crowns and shields. They restored the gates and the chambers for the priests and furnished them with doors. There was great rejoicing among the people, inasmuch as the disgrace inflicted by the Gentiles had been removed. Then Judas, his brothers, and the entire congregation of Israel decreed that the days of marking the rededication of the altar should be observed with joy and gladness for 8 days every year on the anniversary, beginning on the 25th day of the month Kislev. At that time they fortified Mount Zion, encircling it with high walls and strong towers to prevent the Gentiles from coming and trampling over it as they had done in the past. Judas stationed a garrison there to guard it, and he also fortified Beth-zur so that the people would have a stronghold facing Idumea.